Hello, everyone, and welcome to Textile Talks. My name is Carolyn Ducey. I am the Artist B. James Curator of Collections at the International Quilt Museum, and we're just so pleased to have you with us today. Located at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, the International Quilt Museum proudly stewards and exhibits the world's largest collection of quilts and related textiles that span 5 centuries and over 65 countries. In fact, that is our mission and our passion, to build a global collection and audience that celebrates the cultural and artistic significance of quilts. Before we begin today, I'd like to recognize and thank the organizations that partner with us to bring you Textile Talks each week: the Modern Quilt Guild, the Quilt Alliance, Studio Art Quilt Associates, SAQA, and Surface Design Association. We are honored to bring you free and inspiring programming with the help of our sponsors, and we couldn't do it without their generosity and the generosity of viewers like you. Just a couple of housekeeping reminders before we get started. Please use the Q&A for any questions that you have for our speakers. Use the chat for greeting people and for connecting to the survey so that we can improve on the Textile Talks. If you prefer not to see the notifications for the chat, please just click on the chat button to toggle them on or off. The live captions will make the Textile Talks accessible to a wider audience, but you also can turn off that notification. We have a wonderful program for you today. I'm so pleased to have Roderick here with artist Basil Kincaid. Lucy will post both Roderick's website address and Basil's website for you, as well as the International Quilt Museum in the chat. So I am delighted. I'm going to introduce Roderick to you, who's a dear friend, and I'm going to let Roderick introduce then our special guest. Roderick, for more than 4 decades, has been a famed quilt collector and best-selling author. He's been sought out by major art museums and top quilt industry figures for his exceptional taste, experience, and advice. Roderick is a dear friend and a wonderful friend to the museum. In fact, that's why we are hosting Basil today, because Roderick brought him to our attention and to the attention of our acquisition committee. And we are so fortunate to have a piece by Basil in our collection, which Roderick's going to tell us all about. So Roderick, welcome. Basil, welcome. And I will be checking on the questions as they come in. So in the meantime, we've got a wonderful presentation for you. So Roderick, please take over.
Thank you, Carolyn, and thank you, International Quilt Museum, for inviting me to participate today. Thank you, Basil, for your agreeing to participate today. I also want to thank Julia, your studio assistant. She's been a valuable help to us. Yeah. And Carolyn's going to be in the background, kind of running the show. So I'm going to read just a formal thing about Basil. It will take too long to do it all, but I think this came from your website, that Basil splits his time between the United States and Africa, I think specifically Ghana. Many of the narratives and concerns that make their way into Kincaid's work reflect the artist's experience of examining relationships between ancestry, place, and the contemporary constructed self. He currently is in a show at the Mindy Solomon Gallery in Miami called Hand Over Hand, Textiles Today, that's up until June 3rd. I got to know Basil through Instagram. There are 3 other artists in that show: Coulter Fussell, Paolo Aro, and Samantha Bittman, that I also follow on
Amazing
Instagram.
artist.
And it's fun to see, after all these years, this coming together of various very talented artists being shown together, and just lots of textile happening now in the galleries. And you also, there's the show at Rockefeller Center still up, or?
Yes. So that was a collaboration with the Art Production Fund, and that is up for a few more months. I have to get the exact ending date, but I know through the end of July for sure, because I'm going at the end of July. Yeah, okay, somebody's got it. Julie, okay, great. August, yeah, 31st. So yeah, so that's really excited about that also.
Yeah, that was exciting to see your posts on Instagram. So some of the topics I want to go over or just, hit upon is family, because I know family is important to you, working out, fingernails, and encouraging Black collectors.
Yes.
So I don't have a picture. There are a lot, you've posted a lot. I went through your Instagram account all the way back. I was trying to find where I first came upon you and how I learned about you. And I think it might have been an artist friend of mine in San Francisco who said, do you know this guy? So I think my first like of something of yours was in 2018.
Okay, yeah, I thought it was gonna be maybe even in 2017, because it feels like we've been interacting for like the majority of my quilt making time.
That's how I felt too.
Yeah.
but Instagram lets us know. One of the things that I appreciated so much and was how open you were on Instagram of your struggles, your challenges, and being just very vulnerable on that social media platform. And then starting to work out. You posted lots of pictures and videos of you working out in the gym. We'll show some pictures a little bit. I don't have a picture of your nails, but I realized in going back through, your fingernails are important.
Yeah, I'm getting more into adornment and just, I guess, like the timeline. I started like doing my nails as a way to just plant this seed of kind of taking time for myself and like remembering to just appreciate myself. Like sometimes when you're so focused on like making your best art and establishing yourself and getting from the struggle phase to the thriving phase, it's like it's easy to forget to take care of the golden goose. And so
Right.
the first step was like, okay, maybe I'll do this thing that's like beautifying myself. And then I started training in the gym like maybe mid 2017. And posting about it was like in the beginning, like mainly just an accountability measure, like
Right.
and also too, I realized like I like watching the videos of myself train. Like I like looking back and seeing like, man, like I couldn't do that before, like I couldn't do this before, like seeing the progression over time. And so I was one day like looking at some other workout video on Instagram. I'm like, I should be watching my own self exercise. Like I'm sitting here on the couch watching this person, like, let me go make my own video and see how that feels. So a lot of that leads into the piece that you helped the acquisition for this in the International Quilt Museum, that I am not my labor piece. And I guess at some point we'll pull up a picture.
Yes, we will.
But you're not to go too long, but that piece was also really inspired by this journey to prioritize myself and realize that I have value outside of my art making ability and capacity and outside of my productive output or whatever accolades. Like even if I didn't make art, reminding myself that I have intrinsic value.
I'm going to share some of those quotes too.
Yeah.
You care? What are your nails done?
I wanted to get a fresh set before our talk. Each hand is different. I wanted to get a fresh set before our talk. I walked up to the nail salon and they were randomly closed, so I ended up just going on a stroll. But they're about 2 weeks old. But yeah, when I'm in the States, I keep them tightened up.
Okay. And are you in St. Louis now?
Yeah, I'm in St. Louis right now. Yeah.
And is that where your studio is in the US?
My main studio is now in Ghana. I will
Oh, okay.
read and write and draw in St. Louis. And so I'm at my house. I'm setting up a little home studio, but I realized like I need like a separate studio in St. Louis that's not in my house. Like I
Yeah,
was doing this kind of home studio, but I realized if I make wherever I make art, it takes over the whole place. And so if I
right.
ever want to have my own house, I need to not be doing any heavy duty art making. Like I can read and write and draw and think, but my main productive space is in Ghana.
Great.
Yeah.
So those of you who are not following Basil on Instagram, I encourage you to do so.
Please start.
And yeah, and you're going to see a whole lot more of his work there. You're going to see the nails, lots and lots of wonderful shots of his nails. So Carolyn, let's get started.
All right. And Lucy did, thank you so much, put up the Instagram links to both you and Roderick, so people can find that.
Thank you.
All right. How is that looking for you all?
It looks great on my end.
Yeah. Okay.
All
let's
right, Roderick, I'll go to our first slide.
Yes.
I'm going to mute myself.
And I learned today on Instagram that today is National Collage Day. And
I didn't know that. I need to post some of my collages.
I know. Well, I decided to start with collages and rather than textiles because I love them so much.
And it's a very intuitive start. So this is a newer piece, but the collage making precedes my quilt making, but kind of planted the seed and I guess maybe ambiently in terms of my interest in fabric and fashion and stuff, because I use these fashion magazines primarily to make these compositions. And so a quick note about my method of collage making, because it's different than traditional collage. I cut and arrange everything by hand, but then I photograph the compositions instead of gluing them down. And so sometimes what I'll do is, like if you look around the collar where the scarf tucks in, it makes it where you can see some of these shadow elements. And then it situates the work within this framework of memory. So like for me, the art making is in the process. And so each composition kind of becomes a memory of the memory of making the thing. So you get to see more of the like intensity of the line work that I'm doing with the knife. And then sometimes I'll layer pieces of paper behind it to make the shadows more intense. But then yeah, go ahead.
Go to the next one, Kara, please. Yeah,
I love this one. So
I do too. And I will say I purchased one of these.
Yeah, when I was doing the prints, I'm glad you got this one. I love this one. And so yeah, I started making collages in this technique in 2013. I was inspired at the time. I was a middle school art teacher, and I was inspired by my students. We did a collage unit, and they were just off the wall, like doing some really interesting things, using the materials in ways that I hadn't imagined. Like some kids, I'd never really liked the gluing part, and there were other kids that were, they were doing folded attachments and tape and glue, some part cut, some part torn. And it inspired me to develop this photographic collage technique where it's a mixture of hand application and then, I don't digitally manipulate them, but the photography is a digital process. So you're looking at like this mixture. A lot of my work has to do with like observing the past and the present and the future, like how were things done in the past, and then how does our contemporary tools and the way we live life impact some of these traditional techniques.
Well, it's nice to hear your process, and that's important. I want to continue with that. I was so impressed with just the precision of them. I thought,
Thank you.
You really can cut precisely.
Yeah, and that that stems from my background in drawing. So I've been drawing, I'm 36 now, and I've been drawing really avidly since I was 3. Like my mom said I didn't even really play with toys. I would just sit there and draw, like, and at first abstract.
Well,
Which
Carolyn
I
should go to
think,
the next slide. That just fits
yeah.
perfectly.
Yeah, so the drawing is where I developed a lot of my line work and a lot of my, I guess, delicate, meticulous hand. So yeah, it's interesting. I'm glad we're doing this like this because you get to see the carryover between each of my different art forms. And so yeah, as the slide is showing, like drawing is my first love. That's where I started. And when you look at my art now, all of it kind of still relates to that original platform, and the drawing informs, you know, the new quilt making, and
Yeah.
it's just like the root, you know, that's like my roots.
Next slide, please. And then is this you work in Ghana? Because they're
Yeah, this
okay,
is
great,
this is
great.
yeah, this is me in my Ghana studio. And it looks like at this point I was cutting a figure out of this brown. So what I'll do is like a painter will mix their paint for a palette, I'll make these quilt tops. So like I'll do like a primarily brown patchwork. Each different color I may want to use, I'll do a patchwork top of those materials. And then I'll put it on the wall and I draw freehand the figures or the different elements of the composition. And then I'll cut it out and we'll hand sew it. Well, sometimes I'll do batting on each layer. So it'll end up being like a normal quilt is like 3 layers, like the front, the batting, and the back. But sometimes the figurative ones, like I'm getting them really 3D. Sometimes they'll be like 9 layers, like, you know, in different areas, you know, so you'll get this volumetric effect.
And you often do work on the floor, don't you? I think you've
Yeah, I
posted
work on the
many
floor a
pictures
lot.
of you at work
I
on the
work
floor.
on the, I love working on the, I'm sitting on the floor right now even. I just love sitting on the floor, working on the floor. And it's like a built-in way to work on your mobility because you're getting up and down off the floor. But you know, the longevity effects aside, I just grew up drawing on the floor. It's like a comfortable, it unlocks some childhood memory, I think, because it's just how I've always been making art.
And I'm curious too to know how did you start working in Ghana?
Yeah, so in 2014, 15 time period, I won a residency through a Boston-based organization, Arts Connect International. And I had built on the internet my own relationship with an artist there, Serge Claudy, who's like, I mean, he's way more famous than me even now. But at the time, both of us were unknown. And he helped make it possible for me to like, I don't know, he like took me in basically. Like I lived with him for a couple months until I found my place, and he introduced me to other artists. And so during that time period, I, you know, made my own friendships and relationships, and those relationships, one in particular, a dear friend of mine, Rhoda, when I decided I wanted to go back to Ghana, you know, we had kept in touch the whole time, and she decided, she was like, I'll help you set everything up, you know. And then so now we work together full time. She manages the operation over there when I'm not there. So we talk every morning, like talking through different parts of the process. Because now I have help, you know, I have some assistants in the studio over there that help me with the patchwork. Like I'll do a design and they'll follow it, or I'll give like a framework of how we're gonna, I mean, I still do some of the piecing myself too, but there's just now the demand, there's too much to do that I can't do it all on my own. So
I wondered about that because I mean, it's just kind of like you're everywhere. There are many more Black American artists who are going to Africa now, right?
Yes, yeah, just more Black people in general, Black Americans in general. And I guess Ghana is becoming like an entry point, which is
Yeah.
interesting because it was, the departure point, being that the dungeons that they held enslaved Africans in before shipping them through Middle Passage. All of those dungeons are along the coast of Ghana. And so when I first went, that was part of my thesis, was like exploring that history. And I mean, we could have a whole talk about that first trip in Ghana, but yeah,
Right.
looking at that as a departure point is what took me to Ghana in the first place. And then just built some lifelong friendships and relationships that are making it possible for the art to evolve over there.
Great.
Can I ask, Basil, where in Ghana your studio is located?
Yeah, it's a kind of obscure area outside of the main city of Accra. So Accra is like the main city. I guess 45 minutes outside the city in this area called Klagon. It's like a more rural area. Like you'll see goats and cows and chickens and cats and dogs walking around. So it's like I mean, it's nice. It's like developing. It's not like, if you go to the main city, it's like being in New York or LA or something. It's like a major city. The area that I'm in, I chose it because there's no distractions. It's just like you and the art.
Nice.
Yeah,
Carolyn,
I'm close to the beach. I like being close to the beach.
Carolyn, let's skip the next slide. I think I've been looking a little bit at the time. Can we extend? Let's go to the next one.
Start looking at some work here.
Yeah, this is an early piece, 2007.
Yeah, this is some of the early work. So I've always had this interest in abstraction. I guess I should also say that like quilting is part of my generational family practice. My grandmother, her sisters, their mom's mom, and I have an aunt that's like deep in the family, retracing the family tree, and she's found quilters as far back as she can trace. So this is looking at some of my, like, inspired by some of my grandmother's like improvisational style. But then I was inspired, the form of it is inspired by how, like, when you wake up, if you sleep with quilts, when you wake up with the quilt, it's like composed on the bed in like this kind of musical, lyrical way. And so I wanted to capture that energy with these, I guess, almost like sculptural paintings.
Yeah, this photo doesn't show the dimensionality of it, but it's very
but
thick.
these are like 8
wall.
inches deep. Yeah,
and
or 6 inches, I guess.
You've done a number in this early period of that type,
of that style.
Let's go to the next, please.
Yeah. And so, I mean, a lot of these you can tell are inspired by my family. Some of these materials are family materials. This piece in particular, so during this time period, I was collecting a lot of material. I was living in this abandoned church. me and one other artist and like this chef were all living in this abandoned church, like making art. And at this time, I like, put the word out and people would deliver materials to the church. So they became kind of portraits of the city, but in a way where it's like, they became pretty specific too, because it's like materials from my life and materials from people that have access to me. And at that time, it was people that, knew that I was closer to, because I didn't have the, probably at this time only had like maybe a couple thousand followers.
Yeah, go to the next slide. Carolyn and I had the first slide up before.
Yeah, so this is pre-muscle.
Yeah, in going through Instagram, I came across, I'll read the quote. It was, you posted this in 22, but I think you talked about this much earlier, but you say 2017, a lot can happen in 5 years. When I took this photo, I was living and working in the roof of an abandoned church, sleeping on the floor above the sanctuary. I got a vision and the courage to rise to it. How did you get that courage and vision?
The original vision came in the form of a dream in 2016. I saw my grandmother like in front of this. So if you've been to St. Louis, like in the city, there's like these row houses, and she was in front of this 2-story kind of shotgun style house, but the whole house was wrapped in a quilt. And she had like this glowing gold aura flowing out of her in waves. And I woke up from that dream like, I gotta start making quilts. Like I was just like, hit me so hard. At the time, I didn't even know how to sew. So I was like, I gotta learn how to teach myself how to sew and then learn how to make quilts. The courage part, I think, just comes from reps, you know? And in the beginning, I mean, I gotta go back to, I mean, honestly, one of my early girlfriends, because her and my brother believed in me more than I believed in myself. And
case.
and that, at first, I guess I was leaning on the belief of other people.
Mhm.
And then like with repetition, you develop confidence. Like if you do something enough repeatedly and consistently, confidence just starts coming automatic. Like, and some of it is like a lot of my Instagram even is pep talks to myself. Like,
Yes, yeah,
you know, like I'll
much.
hype myself up, and I, you know, hopefully it inspires somebody else. But if I have to, I don't know, motivate myself, I just figure out what I can do to like keep myself uplifted.
Let's go to the next
And then I
slide.
just decided that I would never give up. Like some stuff is just making a decision and committing to it, you know?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
realizing like, okay, no matter what, I'm gonna keep doing this. And once you decide that, doors just start opening up. But if you have doubt in your heart, the universe can't move, you know, like unless you believe.
Yeah, that's great. And now the next slide is going to show your working out paid off.
This is the beginning of it. Yeah, I'm starting to
Yeah.
get a little physique.
And you post a number of photos of your worked out body, which is great. So, and then this photo of you on the floor is at Part 2 Gallery in Oakland, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that's where we first met.
That's where we met in person.
Yeah, in person, which was just an amazing show. Loved how you know, the homage to the clothesline.
Yes.
This installation that you did on the wall. And also when I was there for the opening, your mother called. And I was talking with you. You introduced me to your mother on the phone.
You got a good memory.
It was really clear how important family is.
Yeah, and now they come to all my shows. Like she couldn't make it to that one, but my family has been really supportive all the way through. Like in college, I was originally, when I left high school, I was gonna go into financial services. I wanted to do investment banking or hedge fund management or something. I wanted to do something that would make me a lot of money so I could make art. I was like, if I do this really hard for like 10 years, I should be able to retire young and make art. But then I got along my path and I realized like art is it for me. Like there's no, I start dismantling when I'm not being, it's like, you know, when I'm not being myself, not making art. So when I told my parents I wanted to shift my direction in college and asked if they, you know, keep helping me pay for school, they're like, you know, they were like, yeah, but you're gonna end up working harder than all your friends. Like there's no paved path for you. You're gonna have to go tooth and nail to get what you want. And my mom was like, you live a simple life, but you like nice things. So you need to figure out how you can do well.
Carolyn, let's show the next slide, but then we're going to go on because
Yeah,
we're going to run out of time unless
sorry,
we
I can
extend
be a
this for
little
another
long-winded.
hour. So then let's go to the next two. Yeah, I'm curious about this one. There's another shot of it full on, but
Yeah,
the dates 2017 to 2021.
yes.
What
And
was
so
going
like
on in those?
the colorful element there. So what happened is that the colorful element there is elements of quilt that I had made and then dismantled. Like each quilt that I made, there would be some runoff bits. And
Uh-huh.
so each year I took elements from all these different years, those 5 years from from 2017. Oh, that's 4 years, but um all like different elements of those different time periods, thinking about lessons that I've learned in each of those different phases of my evolution. And then the black kind
Yeah,
of almost figurative element
very,
is you
very.
you can't you can't see the detail all the way unless you look really close, but that's hand woven kente that's then embroidered, and it's embroidered with some symbols. And so after that dream that I told you about, and
Yes.
after I started making quilts, that was the first time that art making started to feel spiritual to me. Like I started feeling connected to something bigger than myself, and like I felt it's almost like angels in the outfield. Like when I start sewing, it's like my grandma is right there with me. I can like feel her energy, and so some of these pieces are thinking about that spiritual nature of the art making and how you can connect with these different energies and sources throughout the process, and then looking at how like your relationship to your spirit and nature and the art making, it all evolves like a relationship. Like um all of it is evolving together. And so this is, to me, like this kind of my grandmother handing me the gift of quilt making.
Yeah. Yeah, this is, I think, just so, I mean, it's it's powerful, I mean, there's just so much happening in it. It's an incredible piece.
Thanks. Yeah, and then that was for my first European solo show, I guess, or maybe, yeah.
Let's go to the next one.
Yes, I
I
love
love
this
the
one.
title of this.
Yeah. And so that type of mentality is like, you know, the gym ends up carrying, I mean, I'm not always in the gym, sometimes it's just outside, but exercising carries over into life. Like it never gets easier, like you just end up getting stronger. Like when I started, doing one pull-up with just my body weight is just as hard as now me doing one pull-up with 80 pounds added. It's still the same difficulty. You just learn how to rise to new challenges. And then this was the first piece using the quilt in this sculpture in the round. Because like the quilt that you all have at the museum is still oriented between like, still back against the wall.
Right.
So this was my first piece doing a quilt all the way in the round, and then looking at the juxtaposition of the flow of the material when it's batted versus when it's not. And so one thing that I've been interested in is like honoring the traditions of quilt making, but then also taking liberties within the tradition. So, sometimes my pieces may not be all the way batted, or they may like there's some rules that I may manipulate because we're not sleeping with them.
Right. And that's what it has excited me about your work and others who really are breaking the boundaries and
expanding the language.
Yes, yeah. Let's go to the next one. It's another favorite piece.
Oh, I
Again, this
love
has
this one.
Yeah.
So I gotta shout out my mom because we talk almost every day, and she, ever since I was a kid, has given me a ton of different ideas, and I used to just disregard them.
Of course. What do our parents know?
Yeah. And then she was like, have you ever made a quilt, but like the way you do your collage, like cut the figures out of different quilts and then collage it together to make a new quilt? And I was like, stop right there. Like, say less. That is brilliant. That is a brilliant idea. I'm going to start
Go
doing that
mom.
immediately. Yeah. And so this piece was after a couple years of developing the new style. And so at the time that I made this, it was the most elaborate quilt that I had made. And the black figure is like fully 3D. Like I took the batting from
Yes.
old blankets. So a lot of it has to do with reuse and resourcefulness. I
Yeah.
took the batting from secondhand blankets
Mhm.
and peeled out the fibers and stuffed different elements so you get this volume in the form. And then like you look at the date again, the river flowing through that central figure,
Yeah.
those are also all different remnants from my quilts throughout time. So like the first slide that we kind of skipped, well, you can't see my mouse, but where you see that green and black, those are me and my brother's clothes from high school. Then this blue and burgundy and black. In 2017, I collected old choir robes. Those are all old church robes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then so like all these materials were used in different installations in the city in St. Louis or performances throughout my development. And then you see the West African elements coming into play in the background and foreground, where like that central figure is like a patchwork of that hand woven kente material I was telling you about.
Yes, yes.
And then like using the traditional laces that the elderly people wear. And then on the right, this like really intricately woven kente. And then also like the really vibrant colors, those are materials that people make every day, like the African wear, like the clothes out of. So there's a mixture of like reused materials that are reflective of everyday life, and then traditional, like merging Ghanaian traditional fiber art practices with Black American fiber art practices.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Again, and the way the river flows out onto the
yes,
shores.
yes,
Is
yes.
this piece still available?
I'm not supposed to 100% talk about it, but I think there's a museum in Europe that's lined up for this one.
Okay. International Quilt Museum needs to get second in line in case that.
Oh yeah, I mean, look, let's
Just
talk.
saying.
I'm always making new quilts. Like I can make y'all another epic quilt.
Okay, so
I
let's.
love. Oh, whoever said it looks like a creation scene, that's definitely part of the story. And I'm looking at the chat. It is like an origin story. So this is like,
Yes.
I really like the creation of myself, like
Mm.
me becoming over, like my becoming.
Yeah, it's another very powerful piece. Just amazing.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun making that one.
Let's move to Lullaby.
This is another one of my favorites. But you can see how, like, even in just the year between 2021 and 2022, the technical ability stepped up tremendously. So I'm like learning, I'm getting better at drawing and cutting. I'm getting better at each part of it. But I still love this piece. And this piece is the one that inspired the new three-dimensionality. So you can kind of see in the thigh, where it's a little 3D.
Yes. Yeah.
But like I just, I'm a big fan. Like I've always had a kind of painterly approach, like thinking of composition and like, I mean, there's even like an element of abstraction to them. But yeah, so a lot of my work has to do with like protection and comfort and care. What's that question? How do I
Um,
turn the scale
Carolyn,
size?
Carolyn's going to monitor the questions and then
Oh,
and
okay.
come
Sorry.
back.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
um, and I think just time wise, let's go to the next.
Yeah. So that's from this year, the beginning of the
Yes.
year. So this is
How
the
did this come
first.
about?
Yeah, so I've been in talks with the Art Production Fund about another project that I have in mind. Um, and we were like looking at the scope of that project, and it was like maybe a little too ambitious, like my initial idea. But they're just so great. The women at the Art Production Fund are so phenomenal. And we were just like brainstorming, and they're like, a lot of your work has to do with migration and like the movement of these materials, how you relate to yourself in different places, how you understand yourself in different places. And so they were like, how would you like to do an airplane? And we started talking about it, and it made perfect sense conceptually. And then so Freeze, this was at Freeze in Santa Monica. So
Right.
it's like right there. Yeah, I've always loved Crystal. So there's some overlap. But like I was saying, like there's this theme of observing your progression throughout time. And so these quilts, these were all like pieces that I saved that I had done different performances or outdoor installations
Mhm.
with in St. Louis. And then I guess the blue that's on the tires and it like looks like it's sitting on the sky, and the
Yeah.
tail fin, that's stuff that I made in Ghana. But just like this piece is like your honoring that development, like looking back and saying, okay, this younger version of myself would be really proud, like I get emotional, but it's like sometimes it's hard you have to remind yourself to take time to appreciate everything, because it's like things can happen so fast, and it's like, okay, you did one thing, now you're on to the next thing. And I
Right.
think it's important to like remember the journey, like remember the people that came before you that made it possible, and like remember shit, like all the effort you put in. Like it's not easy to take that leap, so this is like, okay, we jumped off the cliff and now we're flying.
Now you're flying. Did you have to dismantle all of that, or is that plane still
So
exist?
Julia and I set it up, and then they had at the Art Production Fund, they had people to dismantle it.
Okay.
So yeah, we provided instructions for the deinstall. But yeah, I mean, that's a whole, honestly, we should make like a movie or cartoon at some
Oh
point about
yeah.
that,
Yeah.
because that experience was hilarious. Like we put it together once, and the wind almost blew it off. And then like we brought it to this location, and so we ended up basically doing it 3 times before we got this.
Okay. How are we doing time wise? Are Carolyn?
We've got about 15 minutes. I think we've got enough to
Oh,
talk about the piece here
yeah.
at the museum, and we do have some great questions about some
Right.
technical
Right.
things. So let's take another few minutes and talk about this piece that we have here at the museum. I'm so
Yes. Yes.
interested in learning more.
So this is a quilt top that I collected early on in 2014 or 2004. Show the back also, because I love the back. It's an unfinished
Yeah, I
top.
love the back too.
Yes, yeah. And I decided at one point I was going to just like disperse some of the tops to quilt makers and artists whose work I really liked, and just said to them, I want to give this to you, do whatever you want, use it as an inspiration piece, hang it in the studio, cut it up, whatever. No strings attached. So this, and along with a number of other tops, but this
Yeah, I
was
think
really,
you gave me like 4 or 5 really amazing pieces.
yeah. But I really, really love this one. And then I guess maybe you posted it, Basil, or I was online, but then go to the next. All of a sudden I see it, this piece in a gallery in London.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, oh, wow. So amazing.
Yeah. So all of that material became really inspirational for me. And this was a really pivotal piece in the development of my work, because it represented another one of those leaps of faith that ended up developing my confidence even more. But so 2019 came, and I was having this, I don't want to call it a crisis, but I was having this emotional, what's the word? Maybe quandary of sorts.
Yeah,
Where
I remember.
I was starting to feel like not burnout. I had plenty of energy to create, but I was starting to feel like I was confronting the fact that I had tied up all of my self-worth in my art. Like, I felt valuable because my art was good. I felt valuable because my art was worth X amount. I felt valuable because people praised what I created. And I realized that that's like a really dangerous, slippery slope.
Yeah.
And so I started making these money quilts, and I also made this piece that was like a seminal piece in that body of work. That jacket was like one of my old work jackets. Like, if it's cold in the studio, I put it on. That's so you can see paint on the sleeve and pockets of it. And then I was making these money quilts out of $1 bills.
Yeah.
So like that show in London, I had cut up all of my savings at the time. I cashed out all of my savings and I made these money quilts. And the idea was like to break my financial trauma, like to break my fear of money and my fear of success. Like, when you grow up without much, it frames your imagination in kind of a limited way, where like there's this fear around money, like
Right.
afraid to have it, afraid not to have it. And I was like,
Yeah.
I don't want to be living like this. And so, like I use the cleaning materials and like these elements that represent like physical manual labor, and looking at art making as like a manual labor process.
Right.
And looking at like the history of quilt making is this, almost like quilts are always given as gifts. And so the labor of it, I don't think anybody really, I think we're just now starting to realize how valuable emotionally and just as artworks quilts are in general.
Right.
But I'm thinking about all this time period where my grandmother and her sisters were honestly doing what I feel like is like the height of abstraction, but they weren't regarded as artists.
Right. Right.
And so this piece is looking at like understanding and relating to our intrinsic value. And that's why I like the way that the quilt is used, is like energy radiating out of this figure.
Yeah.
So like we have this vibrancy that we often, we have to take ownership of it. We often diminish ourselves. We often shrink ourselves. And so this piece is like a reminder, like I'm more than what I do. I'm valuable even if I did nothing. And, like all of these things that have been undervalued, like paved the way. Like my granddad, he was a farmer, my dad's dad, but he sometimes moonlighted as a janitor. And so that's what inspired like the use of the cleaning materials. My grandmother was the quilter. So I'm looking at these elements of my family history, like they did the work that makes it where I can live my dream.
Wow. Oh my gosh, that is so wonderful.
Basil,
we need to take some questions. I hate to even stop this discussion, but
yeah, I'm going to stop it. I appreciate so much learning more of the background, the story of this. And I certainly am honored to have played a piece in that. But as an artist, it's been great watching you. I was so happy to be able to move it into a museum where it can be
Yeah,
seen.
I don't want to interrupt you, but I'm just super thankful that you championed that effort and, you know, brought the group of collectors together that donated the piece. I just, over the years, I just really appreciated your support and want to take a minute to just publicly thank you for, you know, investing in me in a number of different ways and believing in me and always supporting my work.
Well, it's my honor. And I do want to leave time now for questions, but
Yeah.
I'm gonna stop sharing because I don't know if I can, I don't want to do the Q&A over the images, but oh my gosh, I have to say, Basil, this has just been such an amazing talk because I love the way that you've shared so much of your emotional journey, because I think we all need to hear that. And I think especially for the artists who are out there that are struggling to make their way, I think that confidence that you've developed is such a fabulous message for these. And yes, you
right.
said, somebody said do another talk with Basil, and I agree that
We should. That'd be
definitely,
awesome.
Yes,
we
This has
need
been a
more
lot of
time with
fun.
you.
This has been a lot of fun. So I look forward to, I feel like we're planting a seed. I look forward to connecting more. And hopefully sometime I can come out, we do a talk or some programming at the museum. That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of questions that are more about the technicality of your work. Do you quilt the quilts? Do you hand quilt, or do you quilt them yourself?
Yeah, I do. So there's a mixture of hand and machine quilting. As the layers get thick, it gets too thick to really do all the lines in the machine. I'm not using a long arm machine yet, so maybe I could machine it if I had a different machine, but it's a mixture of just like normal machine and then hand quilting. And the new ones are all like totally quilted. I mean, they're honestly super quilted. They're like, you quilt the 3 layers and then you quilt these extra layers. So yeah.
Do you use a structure to create those shapes in the quilts?
No, so the way I do it is I draw on the wall freehand. Then I cut them out. And when I do the applique, what I'll do is scrunch it in just a little bit so it makes basically like a pocket. Then once I do the original like hand sewn applique, we'll do embroidery around it on the machine to really like, you know, lock it down. And then before I do the final quilting and put the back on there, what I'll do is, so you got those 2 layers from the back, I'll cut it open and stuff it and then whip stitch that closed. So it ends up, you know, like you got this thing that ends up like this.
Wow. There are so many questions here that I would like to ask, but we just don't have time for them today. I think that if people do explore your work online or on Instagram, they're going to
feel
get
free
those
to
answers.
so I'm really slow with the DMs, but feel free to email me through the website. We get back to all those emails. I love connecting with people personally. And yeah, you know, follow the Instagram, tap in with the website. Julia and I are responsive, so I would love to connect further. And if you comment on stuff, I'll respond to the comments.
Yeah, and I think what we need from the questions that we're seeing, what I think we need to do is we need to do another talk where we really just focus on how you create the work.
Yeah.
Because there are so many questions about that. And I think that there's just some amazing questions and so many more things that we want to explore. We've barely gotten a taste today of all this.
Well, I just want to thank everybody for, I mean, all 400 of y'all. I didn't realize it was going to be so widely attended. Thank you all for pulling up, and some people that have been part of my childhood and life, my friends' parents, I see in the chat. Also, too, I'm doing a sale of some prints, and there's a couple prints of quilt works that I had done. So yeah, those will help me build my next studio. So I'm really appreciative to everybody that supports, and I like making the art accessible because, you know, now the quilts are worth a lot. So I try to like make it where everyday people can still get my art. So
I love that.
By
Roderick, did
art.
you want to add anything else? Because we're going to have to wrap up here in
No,
a
I'm just,
second.
again, I want to thank everyone for attending today. And it really was my intention. And I'm amazed that we had a Barbara Walters moment that did get emotional, because you have been so open and, vulnerable and emotional in your posts of your work. And I just think that's an important aspect of, besides how you're making it.
But yeah, I mean, it's my
struggle behind
passion and
it.
it's my love, and I put my life on the line to do this work. And so it means a lot, like it means a lot that you all are interested. It means a lot that I'm able to like live out of my passion, such a rare thing. So
Yes.
it's just my gratitude.
Well, we just can't say
Thank you
thank
so
you enough,
much.
Basil, and especially for being so honest and sharing that passion, because it's inspired me, I know, and I love that you're inspired by exercise and moving, and all those things are so important. That I like that you're showing such a positive way to live a life, and that's
art.
a
I
message
think
we all
art is
need.
an extension of life, and making art should make your life better. Like art should be a form of, or can be a form of therapy to help you evolve in your everyday life.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to go to
you,
the
and
gym today.
Yes, it's been so great. I promise
Hit
we
it,
are going to
Roger.
have Basil and Roderick back to continue this discussion. Look forward in the future
I
textile
would
talks.
love that.
I do
that
want to
too.
thank all of our sponsors. Thank everyone for joining us around the world today. It's been so great. Next week, we have Speaking Through My Hands, the artwork of Diana Baumbach, presented by Sakwa. So definitely see you next week for the textile talks. And Basil, we'll see you very soon. And Roderick, thank you so much for an amazing conversation.
My
today.
pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.